first of all, I'm not sure as per the CBA. Now, I know the Knicks fined him, and the fact that Derrick Rose is playing tonight is a disgrace, and we'll get to all that. But what are the legal, if you will, what's the wiggle room for the Knicks? How much could they have docked him? Does he miss a game check? What's the data behind that? I'm not sure the way the CBA is structured when the guy doesn't show up to work.
Yeah, they could have fined him, and they could have suspended him at the very least. If you can't do that, you could just make him inactive, and not play him in the game. I think it's the wrong message not to do something to him, because regardless of his side of the story, you didn't call. And what line of work is somebody not going to show up for work and not take what would amount to 30 seconds out of your day to call, text, email somebody?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they had to go to your apartment because that's how concerned they were, and obviously they were fearing the worst, and thankfully it wasn't anything like that. But, Derrick Rose, regardless of the fact that you felt you needed to go home, you also have an obligation to your employer that's paying you about $20 million a year just to give them a heads up. Because let's face it, I guess the story is that he asked the Knicks to get him back from Chicago. The Knicks are the kind of organization where if there were a family emergency, they would have facilitated a way for him to get to Chicago.
Yeah.
So you're reaching out to the Knicks to get back, but you're not reaching out to the Knicks to get to Chicago.
Wait a second.
Well,
I didn't even know that.
How did he get there then?
What?
Unless I don't know if he took a private plane or if he took a commercial airline. From White Plains Airport, where that's not too far from the Knicks training facility, they do have flights to Chicago, so he easily could have just done that. The story was from, I think it was ESPN or someone reported that he had asked the Knicks to help him get back from Chicago.
Yeah, it's interesting.
Wow.
Frank, does Derrick Rose still love basketball like he did?
Pretty brazen move, by the way. Are you kidding me with that?
Hugely. But
Wow.
the core of this, does he still love the game?
Hey, that's a good question. I mean, you would know better than me because you were a professional advocate. You hear a lot of times from coaches how much some of these players, they kind of just lose the love of the game. Some of them, they still might like the perks of it, but they don't have that passion. I think, and I heard you guys saying it, I think it's a combination of things. And I think, maybe that he's feeling a lot of stress, a lot of pressure, and it's never just one thing. The fact that he got benched Friday and Saturday, the fact that his free agency is coming up, the fact that he's playing for right now a losing team. This is the most time he's ever spent outside of his hometown. Yeah, he did go to Memphis for 1 year in college, but for the most part, he has spent his entire life in Chicago. So maybe all of that is getting to him. I think that's the reason why he went home. I think he was probably feeling a little down. It still doesn't excuse why he doesn't call the team. So I'm sure his career is probably at a crossroads, because Casey Johnson, who knows him very well and is writes for the Chicago Tribune and knows a lot of Derrick Rose's friends, he said he was in like an emotionally bad place the other day, and that's why he decided to go. So, and I think the Knicks and Derrick Rose kind of had to come up with a story, because I think, let's face it, when you say something like that, unfortunately, we still live in a society where people look at that as a major sign of weakness, but that's really not the case. And I think also, too, Derrick Rose's people, his agents, are probably looking to protect him a little bit here, because he's going to be a free agent on July 1st.
Yeah.
And I still think he could easily bounce back from this and still, score a big contract. I mean, Tyler Johnson, who we wouldn't know if we tripped over him, is making about $50 million in the NBA. So, Derrick Rose is still going to get paid, assuming he's healthy.
Listen, you're right. Mental health, nothing to joke about for sure. And too many people either marginalize the impact. You're right, but pick up the phone. That's inexcusable. Frank Isola.
Yeah, 100% right.
No, I got you. Frank Isola, of course, covers the Knicks Daily News, ESPN, with us here on Tiki and Tierney.
Frank, I follow you on Twitter, Isola, NYDN, for those who want to follow him as well. And I'm looking at, this thought of contemplating retirement. I'm also looking at this tweet where you say he's considering taking a leave of absence. What does that even look like? I mean, how does that happen for Derrick Rose, and what do the Knicks do if he actually is contemplating these things?
Yeah, it's a tough spot for the Knicks, and that's why I think the Knicks have to look at it. They care about Derrick Rose, and the Knicks, treat their players very well, but I think the Knicks also have to protect themselves, and they also have to think long term. And with the trading deadline coming up, maybe a way to make Derrick Rose feel better is maybe try to move him to some type of contending team, or get him in a better situation where the Knicks could get some type of asset for him, because his contract is valuable, because he's going to be a free agent. And I think the Knicks, if you're being realistic about it, the team is going to be Porzingis eventually, and Carmelo's 32. And, so 2 years down the road, what kind of team are you going to be? And I still think you have to look back at Derrick Rose's physical health from years past. And I think if you're the Knicks, you have to say this really isn't going to be our point guard of the future. It can't be at this point. I think if the Knicks were being smart here, I think they'd really have to, try to do something, salvage something from this deal, and maybe, get some type of draft pick or maybe a young player. I think the Knicks should perhaps move on. Because remember, guys, the Knicks do have their own first-round pick this year.
Yep.
So I think making the playoffs would be great for them in a lot of ways. It'd be great for Porzingis to play in those kind of games. I know the fans want to see it. But if you didn't make the playoffs, it may not be the worst thing, because at least this year the Knicks finally have a first-round pick.
I agree, and the draft is very strong. And you know what, Frank? To me, it's not about Hornacek, who I actually like. I think there's a lot of good things that he just can't implement because it's the roster is not perfect. Not about Carmelo, even though on some level it is, but a declining star, seems to be more brand-driven at this point with the stupid all-star retweets. And Porzingis, as you mentioned, with the ascending star. This is about Phil Jackson. This was an executive moment, and the highest-paid executive in the building disappeared. Where in the world was Phil Jackson?
Yeah, and I did see him at one point yesterday up at the Knicks practice site. When the gym opened up to the media, he was not in the room, and there were a lot of people in there, including Steve Mills, who was sitting down talking with Jeff Hornacek. And I just think something like that. If you go back to last season, and Gerald Green had that bizarre incident down in Miami where an ambulance had to be called and he was taken to the hospital, and then they ended up suspending him. That was Pat Riley who sat down and explained the suspension and explained the situation. Jeff Hornacek has to answer enough questions about playing time and about, guys are injured and how come you did this and why'd you run this play and how come you didn't play this guy. This should be a situation. This should be above Jeff Hornacek. This should be the president of the team having to address the Derrick Rose situation, why the Knicks are only fining him, not suspending him. I really thought it was unfair to do to Jeff Hornacek. That's where, to me, you need the guy in your organization to show some leadership. And I felt in that situation, Phil Jackson did not show leadership. And I think when the top guy is showing any kind of accountability, then you have Derrick Rose not calling the Knicks. You have Carmelo, who we all like. Carmelo's a great guy to deal with. But Carmelo can't be getting kicked out of that game against New Orleans. It looked like he was completely bailing on his teammates. But, the lack of accountability, to me, starts at the top, and it starts with Phil Jackson.